Hello everyone. Can y'all hear me okay? Am I audible? Hello, Super Dark. Hello, DSI friend. It looks like there's only 2 people at the moment, but oh, there's 3 people now. My thing didn't update. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Flower Gothic continues to read terrible fanfiction and suffer for it. Anyway, okay, levels are fine, but speak up. Okay. So, before we begin, there was something I wanted to show y'all regarding last Wednesday's fanfiction. So, when I was looking for a thumbnail for the video, I came across the Wikipedia page of Urasaya Spurbund, who plays, quote-unquote, the socialite who has been forced into a marriage with a Danish prince. And I noticed that she starred in a drama called The Crown Princess, where she is sent to Thailand secretly, where Kugi Mia, who plays the Danish prince, who is also a narcissistic asshole, is assigned as her bodyguard, and they slowly fall in love. So, that is why there is so good picture quality. Gothic Fic stream coincides with my GMT hour. Oh. Yeah, so that was just something I discovered that I wanted to share with y'all. Anyway, today I'm letting y'all pick the fanfiction because, again, I don't want to turn this into the Lovely Angels bashing show, and second of all, How to Take Care of Your Pregnant Omega was recently updated, but I really felt uncomfortable reading it. I love ripping off movies into my fanfic about royals, but white. Well, the thing about some members of the Danish royal family is that, like, one of the peoples who was formally married into it was at least of partially Chinese descent. So there are members with royal blood that officially have, like, some Asian ancestry in there. Not as much as, like, Nade Kugi Mia. Definitely not the same amount, but still. So, we also have a Justin Bieber fanfiction, this BTS fanfiction, some Markiplier fanfiction, a Jeff the Killer fanfiction, the Ruby Smut I'm gonna keep refusing to read, this really weird Family Guy fanfiction that's just been on my list and I'm partially sure is a shitpost, more royalty fanfiction not by the Lovely Angels, I'm his slave, which is... Actually, this was heavily updated. Like, this was originally something else. Anyway, I'm pretty sure it's sexual in nature anyway. And we also have the teacher, if y'all are interested in me continuing the teacher. Do you want me to continue the teacher? Because I promise you, it gets, like, infinitely more ridiculous. We also have Adopted by Liza Koshy, How I Met Morgs, more Onision fanfiction, a Descendants fanfiction, so, what do y'all want? Oh, I also have Duggar fanfiction, forgot to mention that. And the Yandere X-Readers, and this Brian May X-Reader fanfiction I keep procrastinating on. And some Omegaverse fanfiction, including this thing that isn't exactly fanfiction, but still. So what would y'all want? What do y'all want? You have a lot of options here. What is this Chris Pine bullshit? The Brian May? Which Brian May one? There's two of them. This one and this one. We have a Brian May collection and The Stars of 1973. Which one are you referring to, DSI friend? Which one? Either, okay. Are the rest of y'all okay with the prospect of the Brian May fanfiction? Should we start the Chris Pine one? I'm not 100% sure I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to. Well, given on the stream of the Queen Scholar, it makes sense. Alright, fair enough. We'll read a Brian May collection. I've actually read this one before, partially unironically, but I'll read this one because I also know, like, which ones are not smut. And, second from top right. Oh, the Kirk fanfiction. We're not doing that one today. And part of this is a really weird story about Brian May falling in love with an uwu broken girl. We're not going to get into that one either, because that's kind of problematic. So I'm going to try my best to avoid all those dumb things and focus on the silly parts. I haven't actually read these in a while, so this will be a learning experience for both of us. Or all of us. I actually recently unfollowed Brian May on Instagram because it was a little too much for my mental health. But enough about me. A living nightmare. Innocent. You had been awake for almost 15 minutes now. Yes, Brian May is a piece of shit. Calmly watching your husband, Brian, sleeping beside you. It was one of your favorite things to do before you got up to start your morning routine. When Brian slept, his curly hair was wild and tangled against the satin pillows. His face had a small smile on it. Every morning it was the same. Until this morning. His breathing had increased rapidly and he was mumbling incoherent words. Brian did sometimes sleep talk, but these words came from distressed lips. Oh my god! Sweat beads had formed on his forehead. You watched in worry as his head thrashed from side to side, his brow creased in worry. Sounds like what I was going through when you sympathized with my abusive ex, Brian. Roast! He shot up suddenly, and you jumped as you nearly got smacked in the face by his arm. Your name! Don't leave me! You snapped out of your daze and quickly embraced him as he awoke, breathing heavily. Disjointed, he tried to push you off of him, but you quickly soothed him, brought to you by the Department of Redundancy Department. Shh, Brian, it's okay. I'm right here. You're safe, babe. It's just a dream. Brian had nightmares occasionally, but they were often the result of nerves before a show. He could pull himself together after a couple minutes of soothing words and kisses. But not tonight! He stared at you, drenched in sweat, his eyes full of tears. His breathing still was too quick, and before you could say more, he began to cry. Brian's crying. Like if you cry every time! Loud cries of anguish. Separated from the rest of the paragraph to make sure it's emphasized and shit. Slightly shocked, you loosened your grip on him to have a better look. The tears that had threatened to fall were now dripping down his face. Look how hard I can cry! Soaking his white sleeping shirt. He was shaking terribly as the hard sobs racked his body. Swallowing back tears of your own, you wrapped your arms around Brian once more and wiped away the tears running down his neck. Brian, baby, it was just a nightmare. Shh, calm down, babe. I'm not leaving. You moved your hands to rub his back, feeling his spine against his smooth skin. Brian reached for the hand that was on his left shoulder and held it tight. Is it your hand? We'll never know. Your heart broke as you rubbed his hand with your thumb, tracing small circles. It was always a sign of reassurance. Whenever either of you could say, "It will be all right," you could reach for each other's hands and hold them, tracing circles. Not saying anything, just the skin contact was enough to say all you needed to hear. Fucking hell. Brian wiped his face with the blue sheet that was cocooned around his legs. He took a deep breath and finally looked at you. I am so sorry, your name. I'm so sorry, love. You glanced at him confused. Darling, you don't have to be sorry for anything. It was just a nightmare, nothing more. Leaning in, you softly kissed his swollen lips. He barely responded, his mind still clouded. He shook his head. No, this one is real. You stared at him, his eyes pleading you to understand. It hit you. Around 6 months ago, you two had finally decided that you were ready for a baby. After 4 months of trying and not even a sign of pregnancy, you and Brian headed to the doctor to see what was wrong. Brian had thought that the birth control you had been taking messed up your menstrual cycle. He's mansplaining the birth control pill. Oh my god. Oh my god. But he was wrong. Brian was infertile. Upon hearing this news, Brian had stormed out of the doctor's office and you didn't see him at the house until hours later. Brian apologized immensely for his behavior. That is it. That's his character because he's a piece of shit. I mean, that is fair. He is the guy that cheated on his wife and then cheated on the woman he cheated on his wife with his married secretary. This is the man we're talking about here. Clip that. Clip it now. And immediately expressed that he had failed as a husband and that he had failed you. You sat him on the edge of the bed and cupped his face in your hands. Brian Harold May, you haven't failed me once since the day I met you at Roger's party in '74. And he also smeared Freddie Mercury in the doc he funded. There's a lot wrong with Brian May, and I really want to do a video on him at some point. It's just not the right time. When the time comes, I'll do one. It's just not now. Just because we can make a baby of our own, it doesn't mean that we can't be parents. I love you, and you need to get that stupid idea of failure out of your head. You thought Brian had forgiven himself because you're an idiot, as he agreed to adoption in the future and even still insisted on trying in the event that you were blessed with a baby of your own. But after tonight, it was now clear that it still haunted him. Brian's sniffles brought you back to the present, and you gently eased your space self onto his lap, resting your head underneath his chin. He wrapped his long arms around you and didn't let go. Baby, why have you been hiding all this pain from me? You know we don't hide anything from each other. Brian nodded in the crook of your neck, breathing slowly. He raised his hand to meet your gaze. It just started to bother me again, seeing John with all his kids, Veronica being pregnant again, and now even Roger has a baby on the way. You mentally kicked yourself. Why couldn't you see it before? Oh, hey, Cos! Thank you for the raid! Thank you very much for the raid. Welcome! Welcome everyone that is new. We are reading some terrible Brian May self-insert fanfiction. Please stick around. I will be roasting this ass for like an hour. Hello, Cos. Anyway, this fanfiction is about Brian May being infernal and being an absolute fucking prick about it. Welcome. Brian was surrounded constantly by babies and families. You knew you should have caught it before it became an issue again, because of course we're going to be blaming the victim in this scenario. Brian gently caressed the bare skin on your shoulders. It was awful, your name. We had decided to try again, and as I started to kiss you, you backed away and said you were going to be with a man who could give you a family. His voice cracked and you could see him swallow back tears. The tears that he already poured aggressively. So, yeah. It just hurts so much. I want to give you babies. I want to be a father to our children. I just want to be able to give you what I can't. And with that, Brian began to cry again. Did he stop? But you knew what to do this time. Brian, look at me. You wiped away the tears and firmly gripped his shoulders. I wish we could have our own babies. I'm not going to lie, but I don't appreciate the fact that you decided to keep this pain inside. You know in our vows, we said that if we ever hurt, we could heal together. I'm here for you, Brian. Please don't suffer on your own. I am a woman, bleep bloop. I think the person who wrote this was a woman, though, so I don't know what her excuse is. Tears ran down your face now, and Brian looked at his lap, playing with the seams of the sheet. I love you too, your name. I'm sorry for not telling you, love. Come here. He pulled you further into his lap, and you wrapped your legs around him. You inhaled his scent, the familiar smell of his shampoo and cinnamon. And cheating ass, comforting you. You began playing with his long brown hair, gently working out the tangled bits and giving a massage to his scalp. Brian hummed in appreciation and he rubbed your back, slowly sliding under your tank top to rub your pale skin. As you moved to do the same... What? You noticed his shirt was still soaked with sweat. Brian, let's get you a new shirt, okay? You gave him a slow kiss on the cheek and walked over to the dresser where Brian kept his pajama shirts. It's already morning! Why do you need another pajama shirt? Why? You picked a simple blue one and headed back over to your husband in case you'd forgotten. He's your husband now, deal with it. He had already removed his shirt. And all the fangirls reading this all collectively creamed in their pants. I'm sorry, it must be said. Handing him the shirt, he smiled with tears of happiness in his eyes. You're the best wife anyone can ask for, your name. I love you so much. He pulled you back down onto the bed and kissed you tenderly. He sat up and put the shirt you had brought to him on. Running a hand over his thigh, you stared at him and reached for his hand. He lied down beside you, almost completely on top, and held your hand. Small circles from his thumb followed. reassurance. Alright. Next one we'll do is breathless laughter, since I know that one is not smut. Well, thank you for seeing some of this, Spooky Prince. Have fun at wherever you're doing. No smut, but not completely innocent at the end. You crouched down low, hiding between the sofa and the table behind it. Your ankle was cramping and you had to suck in your belly in order to be unseen, but you didn't care. It was fun. You had been washing up some plates from lunch when your husband, Brian, in case you've forgotten, he's your husband, now deal with it, came up behind you and wrapped his arms around your waist. You secretly loved it when he did that, except this time there was something else he did that you despised. He began to tickle you. Brian knew you hated it, but he couldn't resist hearing your sweet laugh or the giggles that would erupt when he dug his fingers into his side. Like the absolute joy that erupted in him when he was cheating on whoever he was dating or seeing. The smile you saw on his face was confirmation that it was just too much fun for him to resist. You managed to escape the torture by throwing water at his face, momentarily blinding him. That's not how it works. The tickling session quickly turned into a game of hide and seek, which had been lasting about 15 minutes. Now, both of you were extremely good at it and could easily hide into any space. How Brian could do it with his height of 6'2" was a mystery to you, but when you asked him one time, he refused to tell. He does love attacking people in the back, to like how he did to Freddie Mercury. Have y'all ever seen, like, Brian's complaints against the critics who bashed Bohemian Rhapsody rightfully? He was like, "Oh yeah, thank you, Slash, for giving it a positive review. Your words are much more important to me than the words of these elite critics." And this is the same guy who, like, thanked a young lady, pretty sure she's not a minor, I hope she's not a minor, for standing up for him when he was being bullied last year. Even though, as we all know, rich white men can never be bullied. It is impossible for them to be bullied. Clip that, that's a fact. Now as your ankle began to lose circulation, you began to doubt he was going to find you. You hadn't heard any noise from him in a while. Even though it was a risky move, you got out from your hiding spot and quietly snuck back into the kitchen. You turned the corner and water came flying at you! Gasp! Looking up, you saw Brian holding the sink nozzle, with the biggest smile you had ever seen on him since your wedding day 3 weeks ago. In case you forgot, you are married now. Gotcha, love. You laughed and shook water off your arms. How did you know I would come back to the kitchen? Because I know you can't stand having any dirty dishes in the sink. That is absolutely not me. You blushed slightly and smiled. Well, you're right, but I actually came in here to eat something. Up. We're getting into the pseudo-smut. Brian's big grin faltered slightly and he began putting the sink nozzle back into place. But your name, we just ate lunch. How are you still hungry? You smirked lightly and bit your lip. Looking at him square into the eyes, you said, I wasn't talking about food, babe. Brian looked up at you, confused, until it hit him. He smirked back and walked over to you and lifted you onto the wet kitchen counter. Ah, Brian, the counter has water all over it. My pants are soaked now. A real thing, a person has said. Thank you, Superdark, for clipping that. Thank you, DSI Friend, for also clipping that. Now we have 2 instances of proof that rich white men cannot be bullied. Or bullied. You were smiling, but your smile couldn't match Brian's as he leaned in to huskily whisper, Then let's get you out of them. You shivered slightly at his words, but mostly from the fact that you were soaked from head to toe in water, somehow. Grabbing a fistful of his gorgeous curly hair, you leaned toward and kissed him softly, but Brian wasn't having any of that. He deepened the kiss and picked up you from the counter, slowing, making his way out of the kitchen to the hallway that led to the bedroom. Breathless from the kiss, you said to him, I should have asked you to tickle me more if I knew how much fun it was going to be. Brian laughed and kissed you on the forehead. Your name? We haven't even gotten started yet. And then they fucked. The end. Principle of pleasure. We're skipping that one. That one's smut. Curly hair is gorgeous, but in this instance it belongs to notorious asshole Brian, so it lacks momentum. I mean, you have a fair point. Also, 70s Brian is infinitely hotter than now Brian. Did you know that there's smut written about today Brian? Yeah, it's disgusting. I've read some before and it's fucking disgusting. So we're gonna read Let Them Eat Cake now. Because principle of pleasure is pure smut. You flopped down on the bed, sinking into the soft mattress. It had been a long day. Your best friend had gotten married, and naturally, she'd choose you to be the maid of honor. You had been ecstatic when she asked, but the work and time that went into the wedding was more than you ever could have possibly imagined. It didn't please you to say this, but you couldn't wait to get out of the reception and go home with your boyfriend. He's now your boyfriend, Brian. He had clearly had so much fun. He never stopped talking on the drive back to the flat, and when you two left, you practically had to drag him away. But you were glad he enjoyed himself. His band had been having lots of problems making an album, which is to be called sheer heart attack or something along those lines. Brian had been stuck in the hospital with hepatitis for a while. That actually did happen. They literally had to, drag him through security Weekend at Bernie's style, if I recall correctly. It was still trying to get used to recording again. He had told you that the studio was giving them no money for things. If Roger broke his drumsticks, no replacement unless it was out of his own pocket. Roger could barely afford to pay rent. How could he pay for sticks? Step 1. Go into the woods. Step 2. Break off a tree branch. Step 3. Profit. You were pulled out of your thoughts by hearing Brian walk into the bedroom. Tired, love? You groaned into the pillow your face was buried in. You have no idea. My feet are killing me because of these heels we had to wear. I am woman. Hear me say woman thing. You felt the shoes immediately come off your feet and heard them fall onto the floor. Thanks, babe. You could almost feel Brian smiling at you. You're welcome. Now I have a surprise for you. No sex, Brian. I'm too tired to be physically mutilated by you. Oh my god. Oh my god. I hope whoever wrote this was not a minor when she wrote it. I really hope that. Brian laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. But no, it has nothing to do with sex. Come on, just look. Yeah, physically mutated, Sandy. Apparently, they read 50 Shades of Grey once and thought it was a love story. Your name's gonna die tonight. Sighing, you rolled over and saw possibly the sexiest thing you have ever seen in your life. Brian stood at the end of the bed. The sleeves to his white button-up were rolled up to his elbows, his hair disheveled from dancing earlier, and most importantly, he was holding 2 pieces of cake. Not just any cake, wedding cake. The best kind and the best cake you ever had. Brian, how did you sneak those? He shrugged. Sorry. Because you were the maid of honor, we got to take home some cake. Wedding cake is just like chestnut cake. I mean, it really depends on whose wedding you're at. I think the last wedding I went to, it was just like standard vanilla. But then again, this was also in Louisiana, and the reception was just at the bar across the street from the alleyway they got married in. I'll explain more about that later. But for now, I'll keep reading. I was just practicing drawing hiraganas while listening and thought I was hearing things. Mood. Because you were the maid of honor, we got to take home some cake. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out 2 forks and set them on each plate. Before you could reach for them, though, he stopped you. "Let me help you get the back of your dress." You rolled your eyes. There was always a catch. Not that you minded. I forgot this one's a little less innocent. I apologize. Please do not ban me, Twitch. Brian was an absolute fantastic lover. He set the plates down on the bedstand and reached for the zipper. You began pulling your hair out of the braided updo it was in as he pulled the dress off of your shoulders. You sighed in relief as the sticky dress no longer clung to your skin. Brian pulled the rest of the dress off and went to go hang it up in the closet. Clad only in simple black panties and bra, you couldn't have been more comfortable. Brian walked back into the room and began unbuttoning his shirt and loosening his bow tie. "Can I eat the cake now?" He looked at you, briefly admiring your body, before replying with a simple, "Nope." You frowned. He brought this delicious expensive cake for you. I'm sorry. And he wasn't letting you eat it? Why not? He turned around and put his shirt in the hamper and began working on his pants. Because. You watched as he put his belt back into the dresser and his pants soon joined the shirt in the pile of clothes to be washed. Because why? You weren't going down without a fight. When he turned around, you were surprised to see his cheeks were a little red. He was slightly fidgety and he seemed actually a little nervous. I wonder why. Le gasp. Brian stopped and took off his socks. He couldn't seem to look you in the eye. "It's, bloody hell, Brian, you've seen me more naked than this. It's been a fantasy of mine to feed you food in our bed." Cocaine! It's because I've had a fantasy of snorting cocaine off your body. Ironically enough, I think Brian is straight edge. Which means he's lame, but still. He blurted out quickly and promptly turned a shade of red. A darker shade of red than the little red that was originally in his cheeks. You smiled at him. He was too cute sometimes, honestly. You patted the spot next to you onto the bed. "Come, lie down with me then." He needed no more encouragement. Practically running, he joined you and reached for the pieces of cake. Handed one to you, he gave you a swift kiss on the cheek and cut a piece with his fork. They really knew what cake to pick. It was delicious, he said as he put the fork to your lips. Gladly accepting, you ate the piece off the fork without losing eye contact with him. Brian was smiling hugely and cut another piece of the cocaine for you. "You look so beautiful, your name." You blushed as he put the fork to your lips once again, savoring the taste of buttercream and cinnamon. You cut a piece for him. "Your turn, babe." He gladly accepted the bite and entangled his legs with yours. You two were silent for a few moments, the only sound being the scrapping of forks on plates as you two fed each other. As the last bite was taken, Brian cupped your face with his free hand. "Thank you, your name." He leaned in and kissed your lips softly. "Ah, yes, succeeding. Apparently this is a kink, so, that's how you get ants." "Yeah, but this is Brian we're talking about. He would probably, welcome the ants with open arms." He tasted a buttercream frosting and you couldn't get enough of it. Moving to deepen the kiss, you pushed your plate further away from you and wrapped your arms around his neck. Brian sighed quietly and put his hands on your back and pushed you further into him. Time stood still for a while. You focused on nothing but the feeling of Brian's gentle but deep kisses, the taste of the cake, the heat of his hands. Absolutely sensually. Brian pulled away first, breathless, his eyes twinkling. You laughed slightly and gave him a quick peck on the lips. "I love you, Brian May. I love you, your name, and I miss the feeling of human touch." He grabbed the plates and stuck them on his bedside table and turned off the light. You snuggled closer to him as he pulled the cool sheet on you. Resting under the crook of his neck, you listened to his heartbeat. Always a reminder he was real. He was there to stay. He was not a robot. Brian, why didn't you vacuum the bed? There's ants everywhere. Yes, now there's ants to take out the cockroaches. Honestly, possums could invade his house and he would be perfectly chill about it. But if you break into his house one time, he will call the cops on you. It's a double standard and I hate it. Did we successfully fulfill your fantasy, Brian? He rubbed his shoulders and said, It was better than I ever could have imagined. He laughed quietly. Well, that's why it's called a fantasy, dear. The real thing is always better. Sorry, I got a notification. It's irrelevant. The real thing is always better. He sneaked a hand down your back and pinched your backside. Brian! Oops. Ugh, you're so infuriating sometimes. Rubbing the spot where he had pinched you, he chucked. I've got to keep you on your toes. That does not include abusing me, Brian Harold May. Hey, I've done worse things to your bottom. And by that they mean they had anal sex. She's all subtext, I'm all text. You groaned. Brian, no. That was one time I let you do that and my bum was sore for a week. I could barely sit down. Oh yeah, that was a great night. Rolling your eyes, you pinched his backside. He jumped. Eek, your name. You smirked. It's only payback, love. Fair enough. You were quiet for a moment. Hey, Brian. Yes, your name. Who was the women from France who had the saying, let them eat cake or something along those lines? Brian hummed and said, I think it was Marie Antoinette. You nodded. That sounds like something Freddie would put in a song. SMH, what is this vanilla bullshit? I mean, I've read some of the smut this person produced, and some of it is, out there. But I'm skipping that for now, because I don't want to get flagged. Brian laughed. Oh yes, that's very Fred, isn't it? Exactly. Little did they know that about, at least 40 years after that incident, Brian would make a movie completely butchering Freddie Mercury's legacy. Feeling a slight energy boost from the cake, you moved your hand from his backside to reach into his boxers. Brian almost jumped through the ceiling and shakily said, I thought you didn't want to be physically mutilated tonight. You shrugged. Explode his manhood with your hand. I changed my mind. Brian sighed in pleasure as you continued your movements. I should feed you cake more often. Well, you know I have an insatiable appetite. I swear I've heard Freddie say that before. Brian, talking about Freddie while I'm touching you is kind of a mood killer. Oh, sorry, love. I'll make up for it. He began to kiss you, and you silently thanked your friend for giving you the impossible task of maid of honor. The end! Alright, what's next? Late dessert is smut, so we're skipping that. We're going to skip Now I'm Here, because that's part of the Angie saga. And I want to cover the entire Angie saga on another day. Because it's a doozy, I promise you. So we're going to read Snowy Proposal. Dedicated to one of the funniest and awesome humans I've ever talked to. She has been waiting for this fluff piece for a while, and I owe it to her. For you, girl. It doesn't say who it's for. This is ridiculously unsexy. Oh, just wait until I read the smut. Once I finally produce Flower After Dark, the smutty edition of Flower's Fanfiction Theater. Coming soon to YouTube near you. Innocent Fluff, Brian's POV. I walked with her hand in hand, the snow crunching underneath our feet. Apparently they're not wearing boots. We had decided to go for a walk now that the snowfall wasn't as heavy. I buried my nose in my coat and snuck a glance at her. As always, I wasn't disappointed. Her cheeks were rosy from the cold, her blue eyes shining brightly, her long brown hair flying in the breeze that was flowing through the air. She's so beautiful, I wish you could see that, I thought to myself as she moved her wrapping arm around my waist, snuggling closer to escape the cold. We had been together 2 years, and today was our anniversary. She wanted nothing special, just a nice walk in the park and maybe a fancier dinner. She hated special treatment and always managed to keep herself very down to earth, which was a big help for me when our fourth album shot up to #1 with our hit single Bohemian Rhapsody, available in stores now for only $10.99 plus shipping and handling. All of us immediately felt like we were on top of the world, and I had become quite cocky. All it took was a conversation from her to bring me back down and realize that I wasn't above anyone. Too bad the real Brian did not take the same memo. After that conversation that day, a revelation hit me. I wanted to marry this woman. I wanted to wake up next to her every day, to come home to her, to have kids with her, and protect her. All things you can do without marrying her. Just saying. To be able to call her Mrs. May seemed like a dream come true. Hi, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such Brian May fanfiction as I Will Find You Anywhere You Go by a Mr. Bad Guy 26 and a Brian May collection by a Killer Queenie. And today, we're going to be reading A Snowy Proposal. But I had to ask her first, and that was the hardest part of all. I didn't tell the boys I was going to. I wanted this to be a decision completely made by me. The snow is so gorgeous, she said. Not as gorgeous as you, love. I kissed her cheek. She blushed. Aw, stop it. I smiled. She was an absolute dream, and I wanted to be with her always. We should make a snowman, she yelled, jumping over a park bench, presumably injuring herself in the process, to begin rolling snow. I laughed at her childlike antics. She was always up for some fun. It was never boring with her. The way her eyes shined as she collected the snow, the smile that beautifully graced her perfect features. Every day, I seemed to fall in love with her a little more. I totally want to cheat on her after we marry. With an actress from a soap opera. Brian, are you going to join me? I snapped out of my daze and walked over to her, helping her make the body of the snowman. Occasionally, she would stick some snow down my coat, ow, or throw a poorly aimed snowball at me. Needless to say, we abandoned that snowman and had a snowball fight. I let her win, of course, but it was just too cold to continue playing. We sat down on a bench and cuddled together, trying to regain some heat. I felt the box in my pocket and tried to swallow back my nerves. It wasn't the right time yet. Brian? Yes, Rebecca? Never mind. I turned to look at her. What? She blushed slightly. I was going to say how handsome you look. I smiled as she played with the buttons on her coat. Thank you, love. You look gorgeous. You already told me that, remember? Of course I remember. Just making sure you heard it again so you will believe me, I kissed her softly. Her lips were warm and smooth. Now, like the cold that was surrounding us, we broke the tender kiss and sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow lightly begin to fall. I looked around. The park was completely empty. Nobody in sight. Not even any animals were out. It was perfect. The time was now. Rebecca, I've been meaning to ask you something. She looked at me expectantly, nodding to let me continue. I breathed a heavy sigh. Rebecca, I love you. I've loved you since the day we met, and I know that sounds cliche, but it's the truth. You were the prettiest girl I had ever seen and the smartest. And the best thing is, you haven't changed at all. You are still the Rebecca I met almost exactly 2 years ago, because apparently, they decided they were dating, the day they met. So, yeah, that's problematic to say the least. Sweet, considerate, and with a heart so warm and full, it could melt all the snow with just one beat. You love everyone you meet and welcome them with open arms. I love how when I get too big-headed, you brought me back down. Even when we've had trouble, you stayed with me, and I'm forever thankful for that. I would be a completely different man than the one I am today if I hadn't met you. I've never felt so loved and appreciated by someone. You make me complete, Rebecca. I can't survive without you. I held my breath and got up off the bench, lowered myself into one knee. Reaching into my coat pocket, I pulled out the ring box, opening it. I guess what my rambling means is that I love you and I want you to do the honor of becoming my wife. Rebecca, will you marry me? She looked at, mouth open in shock. Her eyes were huge, brimmed with, tears? She put her hands to her face and nodded. Yes, Brian, I will marry you. A million times yes. She leapt up from the bench, pulling me up into a giant hug. I sat in relief, feeling the weight of worry come off my shoulders. She grabbed my face and kissed me passionately. I kissed her back, silently squealing with excitement. We pulled away for breath and rested our out foreheads together. Let me put the ring on, love, I said, pulling the ring out of the box. Oh, Brian, it's so beautiful. Did you pick it out yourself? I nodded. Yes, I did. I wasn't sure if you would like it. May doesn't really seem like the type to do the knee thing for this, TBH. I mean, I do not know how he proposed to his first wife. There was like very little concrete information about his first wife, which annoys the shit out of me. But I remember for his second wife, Anita, just literally approached him and said, "Okay, Brian, I'm ready to get married now." And then they married in like a very civil ceremony. No religious ceremony. She wasn't even wearing a white dress. It was just like a red ensemble like 2 or 3 weeks later. That was it. We looked at the silver ring glistening on her finger, the diamonds brightly shining from the reflection of the snow. Rebecca wiped the tears from her face. I love it, Brian, and, I love you, she kissed me. I can't wait to marry you. Oh, you completely surprised me. I did? Is it too early? I asked, worried. She shook her head. No, absolutely not. I'm ready to be called Mrs. May. Oh, I'm May's second wife! Tag yourself. I'm the detractor of the Brian May fandom. I'm the survivor. I grinned and buried her face in kisses. It thrilled me to hear her say it out loud. I pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. We slowly rocked back and forth as the snow dusted our coats. I loosened my grip to look at her. My heart swelled with love. Her beautiful skin was glowing, the tip of her nose red from the cold, eyes shiny from tears of happiness, and a large smile was on her face. I couldn't have been more in love. I love you, Rebecca. Happy anniversary, my fiance. She gave me a watery smile. Brian, my fiance, I love you too. Happy anniversary. We shared more kisses and hugs until we decided to go for dinner. The snowfall increased, but we didn't feel it. The warmth of our love was enough to melt any traces of cold. So what did you think of that one, gang? Alright, we're skipping Lazy Rainy Day because that's smut. Something Lost is part of the Angie saga. Truly Hot Space is smut. Soap and Bubbles? Skipping that one just in case. That was atrocious. Something Lost is Angie saga. Smut. Angie saga. Pretty sure this is smut. A Lovely Morning? Innocent. Okay. Damn, there's less, stuff that I thought in here. Brian opened his eyes, briefly blinded by the sunlight. He closed them and buried himself under the sheets. Too early, he thought. He opened his eyes again, smiling when he saw his girlfriend's beautiful, sleeping face. Whirling over closer, he wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her wild, tangled morning hair. Brian kissed her forehead gently, waiting for her to wake up. She stirred slightly, sighing as she woke up, brought to you by the Department of Redundancy Department. Good morning, Scarlett, Brian said, pressing another kiss to her forehead. Scarlett grinned sleepily. Morning, handsome, she kissed his neck softly. Brian happily sighed and squeezed her. Did you sleep well? Oh yes, very well. I loved last night. Scarlett rubbed her hands up and down Brian's back. Can we have, a single innocent part of this fan fiction that does not allude to sex? Is that too hard to ask? It was very nice, wasn't it? You were great. Scarlett squealed slightly as Brian nibbled at her ear. Thanks. You weren't so bad yourself. Just doing my job. I haven't been touched in months, and it makes me sad. I just realized we probably aren't intended to be imagining May as the fat old bastard he is now, but how he looked when he was in Queen or something. I mean, he still is technically in Queen, but We're thinking of 70s Brian May. You know, back when he was actually attractive. Speaking Queen died of Mercury. I mean, you're right. Queen is just the shambling corpse of what it once was, but I mean, you're right, Albert. You're right. Speaking of your job, don't you have to go to that in an hour? Brian sighed. Yes, but I don't want to. I want to stay in bed all day with you. He snuggled closer to Scarlet, completely tangling himself in her. She smiled, running her fingers through his unruly mane of curls. After a few moments, she said, But you really do have to get up. Brian groaned. I don't want you. Babe, I know you love cuddling, especially when we're naked. Are they naked? Fuck! What? I sincerely hope the writer of this fanfic wasn't a minor when she wrote this, because that would make this fic much more problematic than it already is. For those of you who are new, which I know is a lot of you, I sometimes sing when things get really bad. Scarlet gasped and smacked Brian on the shoulder. You cheeky bugger. Brian just giggled and kissed her cheek. Scarlet rolled her eyes. As I was saying, I know you love cuddling, but you have work and I'm supposed to go out with some friends. Cancel everything, let's just stay in bed, Brian said. LMAO super sudden nudity! Expositional nudity! Come on, get up. Scarlet tried to untangle herself from Brian. No, he tightened his grip around her. Brian, no, Scarlet sighed. Brian, we really do need to get up. Don't you have a new song you love? Brian shrugged. Yes, but not as much as you. That's very sweet, but seriously, Brian, get up. Scarlet is me AF. He was silent, still holding Scarlet tight. Brian moved to get up when he jumped back down and began tickling her. Brian! Scarlet screamed, gasping for breath as his fingers dug into her ribs. He laughed and continued poking her sides, enjoying the feeling of her wiggling underneath him. Brian, if you don't stop, I'll kick you, Scarlet warned him, breathless from Brian's relentless tickling. What is it with this other tickling? I really do not know. Brian gave her one last poke and fully collapsed onto her. He sighed heavily. I love you, Scarlet. She smiled. I love you too. But, get up. Brian didn't move. Brian. No response. Scarlet rolled her eyes and reached down to pinch his backside, none too gently. Hey, Brian, please get up. I'm serious, Scarlet said, becoming slightly irritated. Brian relented and rolled off of her. She breathed a sigh of relief and moved to sit on the edge of the bed. The bed creaked and Scarlet smiled until she thought she had succeeded in making Brian get up. Until a pillow whacked her in the side. Brian, what the fuck? Pillow fight! Ugh. One of the things that really bothers me about fan fiction like this is that authors seem to project what they want in a partner into the objects of their affection, because Super Dark, first of all, this is extremely juvenile, which worries me even more that this is a minor, and second of all, I know for a fact Brian would never do this. Ever. Ever. Instead, he'll just cheat on whoever he's dating and sympathize with abusive partners. Continuing. Another hit her, causing her to turn around, trying to shoot daggers at Brian, but found it impossible. His smile was shining, rivaling the sun. He was giggling maniacally as he held two pillows over his very naked body. Scarlet grinned. All right then, prepare to lose. Brian playfully scoffed. You wish. Scarlet grabbed her pillow and a massive fight ensued, stretching from the bedroom all the way to the living room somehow. Brian sneaked around, looking for his hidden opponent. Another one bites the dust was all Brian heard before a pillow smacked him square on the back of his head, sending him flying towards the couch. He lied there for a minute before turning to Scarlet. You win, I surrender. Scarlet lowered her pillow. You're not just saying that, right? To prove his point, he threw both of his pillows away and opened his arms. Scarlet did the same and walked over to him, settling so her back was against his chest. Brian began to laugh. Are we really adults? By age, yes, but by our actions, I would have to say no. I guess the only thing that makes us adult is that we are still naked. Slightly startled, Scarlet looked down and saw that Brian was right. For fuck's sake. Leaning her head down so Brian could kiss her neck, she said, "We really know how to be sexy, don't we?" She smiled as Brian chuckled into her ear. "We certainly do." Fuck you. They were quiet for a moment, just loving the feeling of closeness. Brian's hand began to wander, but before he could reach any desirable spot, the phone rang. Groaning, they both got up. Brian walked quickly over, picking up the noisy receiver. "Hello, Brian May here." "Brian, where the bloody hell are you?" Brian cringed as he heard the sound of Roger's voice. "I'm at, home still." We certainly know how to be sexy. I can't even. I really don't know the logic behind this person's writing. Still, Brian Freddy is not happy that you were late. He's about to know this isn't Brian Freddy, it's Brian May. Get her down here before I go and shove one of your clogs up your ass. This is tiring beyond reason. I mean, you're right, Super Dark. And in Freddy's defense, that is exactly what I would do if I ever met Brian May. I would shove one of his shoes up his ass. The phone line went dead. Brian just stood there contemplating whether he wanted to go at all now. "I could hear Freddy all the way in the bedroom," Scarlet said, walking in, now dressed. Brian sighed. "Do you have to go?" "You love making music. What's with the resistance today?" Scarlet said, handing Brian a pair of joggers. He didn't reply, opting to put on his clothes first instead. Brian fiddled with the strings of the loose-fitting pants. "I just want to be with you. You just make my whole day better. I love waking up to you every morning, having mornings like these. But when I go to the studio, we're there for hours upon hours, mainly just having arguments. It's stressful and I'm getting a little tired of it." Scarlet frowned. "Are you having bad writer's block again?" Brian shook his head. "No, after Hot Space, none of us have felt the same making music. I hate that album so much. Why did we even make that? It was just you guys experimenting. I liked it." Ugh. "I know you did, but I don't." Brian sighed and grabbed some bread from the pantry. "I just want to prove that we are better than that." Scarlet walked over and wrapped him a hug. "You are the best guitarist on this planet, Brian. You don't need to prove anything." Brian smiled and kissed her gently. As the kiss grew more intense, the phone rang again. Irritated, Brian turned around, picked the receiver, and put it back down. "Oh, God, no!" No! Brian, what if that was from Scarlet, was interrupted by Brian giving her sloppy kisses on her cheek repeatedly. She squealed when his kisses moved down to her neck. Breaking the tight embrace, she tickled Brian, smiling when he tried to wiggle out of her grasp. "No work today?" Scarlet asked, continuing to tickle Brian. Brian was laughing too hard to fully answer. "No, no work. Stop it." He grabbed her and pulled her to a long, sweet kiss, signifying that they would indeed be insane in bed for the remainder of the day. Up. We have an epilogue! Freddie threw down the phone. He picked up and then hung up. Roger shrugged. "I have a feeling we won't be seeing him today." "Wasn't he supposed to work on his song today?" John called out from the recording booth. "What? Tear it up?" Roger asked. "Well," said Freddie, "I bet that's what Brian and Scarlet are up to right now. So fuck it, let's just get on with it from the top. Let's do Radio Gaga for now." The end. Ugh. I honestly forgot how mind-numbing a lot of this is. Alright, we're skipping Somebody to Love. That's the Angie. That's the Angie saga. Actually, wait. There is like one fanfiction I really want to read with y'all. I think this is the one. Father to Son. I think this is the one. This one is absolutely hilarious. I can't wait to introduce it to y'all. Molly bent down, looking through various cupboards and cabinets to find paper plates, but it was harder than it seemed, with her very prominent belly in the way. She was 8 months pregnant with her first child. While she loved being pregnant, Molly desperately wanted to hold her child to take care of it. "Any luck?" Dominique asked. For reference, Dominique was Roger's girlfriend at the time in like the 70s. Stepping into the kitchen. Molly sighed and tried to get up without assistance, but Dominique could reach her better than that and quickly helped Molly off the floor. Shouldn't you be taking it easy by now? Dominique asked. You're due in 2 weeks. Molly scowled, rubbing her stomach. I just want to help. I hate how everyone caters to me. It's like as if I'm incapable of doing anything. Dominique shrugged. The truth is that you can't do as much as you used to. She loved being pregnant. What? I don't know, man. Molly opened her mouth to deny it, but she knew it to be true. Pregnancy had changed everything from what clothes she bought, which food she could and couldn't eat, and of course the unpredictable hormones. The latter causing Molly and her husband to have either massive arguments or passionate nights of sex. Speaking of husband, Brian appeared at the door, poking his head in. Found the paper plates yet, ladies? He asked cheerfully. The two women shook their heads. Not yet, Molly answered. Brian said, walking over to a cabinet above the sink. He opened it and pulled out a stack of plates, turning around to show it to the girls. Because he's an asshole, as we've established. He was an asshole then, and he's an asshole now. Not fair, Brian, Dominique laughed. We could have never reached that. Brian smirked. I know, I thought I had seen them up here earlier. Dominique took the paper plates and left the kitchen, leaving Brian and Molly together. How are you doing? Brian asked, being very concerned all of a sudden. Molly rolled her eyes. Brian, I'm fine. You don't need to worry. Brian stepped closer to his wife, resting his hand on her stomach. I can't help it. Our baby is coming soon, he whispered, smiling big at Molly. I know, Molly said, kissing him on the cheek. I can't wait. They were silent for a moment, looking down at her stomach, waiting for the baby to kick. She must be asleep, Molly said. Brian laughed quietly. You're so sure it's a girl, because... ... I just know, Molly said proudly, reaching beside to grab some cherries out of a bowl. Of course, since this chapter is named Father to Son, I doubt her judgment. What if it's a boy? Brian playfully challenged. Molly teasingly ate her cherry, enjoying seeing Brian's eyes widen. It won't be. I made sure I was on top so we would get a girl. Brian rolled his eyes. Molly, dear, that's not how science works. Oh yes, I forget, Molly said, placing a cherry on Brian's lips. You're the only one who got a science degree, huh? I'm with you, Super Dark. This is starting to get cringe. Brian bit into the cherry. No, I married a smart woman. I never forget your education, dear. He leaned down and kissed her softly, lingering until they heard coughing behind them. They broke apart, seeing Freddie standing impatiently between them. When you two are done snogging, I would like some cherries, Freddie said tartly. Molly scoffed while Brian blushed. This is worse than cringe. What term do you use for things that are worse than cringe, then? She grabbed the bowl of cherries. There you go, Freddie. Have your cherries and beat it, she said, purposely pulling Brian back down for a more passionate kiss. You two are worse than fucking teenagers, Freddie said to himself, my bad, leaving the kitchen. This is just numbness. Molly grinned, pulling away from the kiss. I just wanted to piss him off, she said, grinning wickedly. Brian smiled back. I could tell. I like you being pregnant. He gave Molly a gently slap on her backside. You get a little naughtier than usual. Will you two stop flirting in my kitchen and come out for cake? Roger shouted out. Molly and Brian shrugged and walked to the living room where everyone was seated. Brian helped her sit down on the couch. Finally, this cake is practically melting, Freddie said. Just shut up and eat the cake, Brian muttered. Everyone was celebrating Roger's 30th birthday. So we established here that it is 1979. This is important for later. The large party had already been held on the day of Roger's actual birthday, but now it was just a small get-together with his closest friends. As cake was passed out, Molly felt the familiar urge to relieve herself and whispered to Brian to help her up. Keep in mind that she said she doesn't need any assistance and that she's not helpless. For fuck's sake, fuck you, a killer queenie. She waddled down the hallway, making her quick entrance to the bathroom. After she washed her hands, wincing as she felt the baby kick hard. Do you really have to do that now? Molly said out loud, irritated. You're the reason I have to pee every 30 minutes. The baby ignored her, and Molly felt a pop by her pelvic bone. Some fluid gushed out of her, running down her legs. Molly's eyes widened. She felt her heart nearly stop. My water just broke, she thought to herself. Now, we have a couple problems here. Number one, you kind of anticipate when your water is about to break because you're having contractions. Because there is a tiny bit of conflict, but it's like it's not even a conflict. So I'm just going to show this for future reference. Signs of labor during pregnancy. Contractions. Once true labor contractions begin, they do not slow down or quiet with simple measures like drinking water and resting. Instead, they get longer, stronger, and closer together. They are working to dilate the cervix. They last anywhere from 30 to 90 seconds, and they are organized coming at regular intervals of time. They may start out spaced far apart, but by the time you're nearing the end of early labor, they should be close to just 5 minutes apart. As your cervix begins to open, you may see tinged discharge. Your water may break as either a small trickle or a huge gush of fluid from your vagina. Regular contractions before 37 weeks may be a sign of premature labor. I'm going to leave that there for reference. A million thoughts ran through her head. They weren't at home. They didn't have their midwife. None of their bags were with them. Molly felt more liquid escape, interrupting her thoughts. She grabbed a towel off the shower rack and rushed off out of the bathroom. She stopped in front of a wall so the rest of the group wouldn't see her. "Brian!" Molly called out. "Brian, come here, please!" She stepped back as Brian nearly collided into her, running into the hallway at breakneck speed. "What is it?" he asked, looking at the towel Molly held around her legs. Molly grabbed Brian and led him further into the hallway. "My water broke," she said, heart racing as to the reality of it sank in. Brian's mouth fell open. "All of it?" Yes. There is that instance where only a tiny bit of your water breaks and you're not fully in labor yet, apparently. Oh my god, what the fuck is this? Molly sighed and went back into the bathroom, sitting in the tub as more fluid came out. "Brian, our baby is coming today," she said quietly, "and we're not ready." This seemed to snap Brian out of it. "Of course we're prepared. We've read books and been to classes and..." Was that even a thing in 1979? Like, baby classes? Was it? I didn't think those became, like, more mainstream until, like, the 90s or the 2000s. "Brian, we're not at home. We don't have our midwife." The author has no idea how pregnancy works. I mean, we haven't even gotten to the good parts yet. "Let's go home then," Brian said. "We don't know when the baby is coming," Molly said, becoming frustrated. "You already know when the baby is coming. It's coming now. Go to the hospital." What does the author have an idea about anyway? She has an idea of her ideal partner, which she seems to project into Brian. They have a better... Do you mean the lovely angels, Albert? By the sisters? Because we don't even know if they're sisters. "What's going on with you two? Oh, whoa," John said, stopping when he saw Molly in the bathtub. "John!" Brian yelled, stepping in front of Molly. Sorry, John said, leaving the doorway. "Brian," Molly hissed, "I'm not naked." "You took your underwear off," Brian pointed out. As beside them, Molly stopped, interrupted by her... As we've established, contractions start before your water breaks. So, you cannot have your first contraction after your water breaks. A killer Queenie, you fucking idiot. I'll be damned if I ever remember their names. "Molly," Brian said, kneeling down. She shook her head. "It's just the first one." Not too bad. Some shouts came from the living room, and the noise of multiple footsteps sounded before nearly everyone was at the bathroom door. "Molly, are you going into labor?" Veronica, John's wife, asked. Molly nodded. "My water broke." There was a moment of silence before all hell broke loose. Phone calls were being made, people are shouting, the ladies were trying to console Molly, who sat very confused in the tub. "I just called the hospital. They're ready for you," Freddie said, putting his hands on his hips proudly. Fred, Brian cleared his throat. Molly wanted a home birth. Now, in like the 70s, I'm pretty sure a home birth was really only done by hippies and people who didn't have adequate access to a hospital. But I'm gonna show more of that proof in a sec. Everyone turned their heads towards Molly. "Your first baby, and you went to home birth," Veronica said slowly, as if she were trying to explain it more to herself. Molly wondered once more, grimacing as another contraction took her. "If you don't like hospitals, I don't want any drugs or strange doctors looking up my skirt." Now, in a normal situation in 1979, this would have been laughed off as hormones, and they would have, or hormones, as a killer Queenie has put it, and they would just drive her off to the hospital regardless. In fact, only 1% of births in 1980 in Britain were home births. And I'm assuming it's around a similar rate in 1979. Especially as the prenatal mortality rate for home births was rising to a level above hospital births since 1977. So, this is grossly inaccurate and potentially very, 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 very dangerous. Veronica sighed, putting her face in her hands. "Always a stubborn woman. All right, come on, out of the tub. We'll fix up a home birth for you." Something that was never said in 1979 urban London, ever. Heart, 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 heart. "I can't believe I'm having our baby at Roger's house," Molly sulked, laying on the bed, which was covered in towels and plastic covering. Brian laid a sheet over Molly. "It will be okay, dear." Molly groaned as the contraction took her. "Is our midwife coming?" Dominique went down to the street to get one. Her name is Mrs. Lowe, and apparently she's delivered over 100 babies. Ugh, I'm not even going to bother looking up the statistics for that. Brian said. "Ah, good. It's an American writing about British people." I feel like even in America, though, most births in the 70s were hospital births. Because I feel like the whole home birth, natural birth movement didn't really take off until... Hell, it wasn't even, like, a thing until, like, this previous decade. "But she's not our midwife. We paid all that money and she won't even be here," Molly protested. Brian sighed. "Molly, it's going to be okay." "Easy for you to say," Molly snapped. "You weren't about to push a living being out of you." Before she could say any more, her breath hitched. "Oh no, here comes a big one." Brian held her hand, and as Molly hit her toughest contraction yet, she wiggled around in pain, a couple tears running down her face. A knock at the door sounded before Dominique and Veronica walked in. Not Victoria, my bad. "We brought the midwife," Veronica said, letting a woman in. Mrs. Lowe seemed to be in her 60s, with gray hair neatly tied up in a bun. She was wearing an apron and had a slight smile on her face. "How do you do?" she asked Brian, shaking his hand. Molly tried to smile as best as she could, with the immense amount of pressure on her abdomen making it difficult. "How long has she been in labor?" Mrs. Lowe asked Brian. About an hour," Brian said, looking at his watch. "And this is your first baby?" she asked. Brian nodded. Mrs. Lowe was quiet for a moment and then clapped her hands. "Well, this will be my first delivery out of retirement, so let's get started. Can I have two people hold her legs?" Mrs. Lowe asked, grabbing a chair from a desk. All right, we're gonna bring up that labor thing again. So, let's see. It was the thing you did up till like the 1930s. Then there was big propaganda campaign against midwives and other natural parenting shit. Alright, here we go. No, I am not starting a family. I'm only 20! Like breastfeeding got discouraged too in favor of formula. So, yeah, they can't deliver the child until her cervix is fully dilated, which they haven't said if that's the case yet or not. This person is riding at the seat of her pants, and I fucking hate it. Molly sat up as best she could. I don't think. Mrs. Lowe chuckled. Honey, I delivered more babies than I can count. Oh god, your search results are gonna be fucked for the week. I actually do not use Google, so, I'm protected on that front. It's nothing I haven't seen before now. She gestured for Brian and Veronica to come over. Molly turned bright red as she laid back down. Brian looked absolutely mortified that someone other than himself was going to be looking at his wife's most intimate parts. Her lovely angels at least Googled the symptoms before writing. That is true. They did Google it. And probably copy-pasted the definition from Merriam-Webster, but oh well. At least they looked it up. A little bit more, Mrs. Lowe said, digging out some tools. Hopefully they were sterilized. Ah, there, keep her like that. Molly met Brian's eyes, trying to pretend a complete stranger wasn't examining her. Brian traced small circles on Molly's calves, trying to soothe her. Another knock sounded. Before Molly could ask them to wait, Mrs. Lowe zigzagged, "Come in." Molly started in horror as Roger walked in, stopping dead in his tracks as he laid eyes on Molly, her legs spread wide. Shit, he stammered. Molly rolled her eyes. Roger, take a picture, it will last longer. Roger, go hold her other hand, Dominique said, nodding her head towards my left hand. That's my job, Brian whined. You're holding her leg, Brian, Veronica said, bemused. Roger quickly walked out of eye view of the examination going on and held Molly's hand. Luckily, the sheet stayed up on Molly's knees, allowing Roger to see nothing. Mrs. Lowe stood up. You're 3 centimeters dilated, officially in labor, and having contractions every 9 to 10 minutes, she trailed off thinking. If you keep dilating at consistent speed, you could potentially have your baby in 4 hours. 4 hours, Molly cried out. Mrs. Lowe nodded as Molly's legs were put back down. And that's relatively short labor as well. Molly threw her head back and groaned out in disappointment. It's going to be a long 4 hours. I mean, at least they know that birth isn't like instantaneous. Molly had barely reached 7 centimeters by the 6th hour of labor. It was long and tedious and painful. The sheet lay abandoned on the floor, multiple fans and windows open to let fresh air in. Brian wiped sweat off Molly's neck and shoulders with a cool washcloth. I want this baby already, Molly groaned. I know, me too. You're doing amazing, Molly, Brian said soothingly. Dipping the washcloth back into a bowl of water, he gently rubbed at her legs with the cloth, working to get any sweat he saw off his wife. Has anybody left yet? Molly said quietly. Brian shook his head, moving to Molly's swollen ankles. Nope, everyone is still here. They're excited for the baby, too. Molly nodded, closing her eyes. Brian? Yes, my love. I love you, Molly whispered. I love you, Brian said, continuing to cool down Molly. Only another centimeter dilated an hour and a half later. Molly was getting cranky and frustrated. Every swear word or phrase ever muttered in existence had been said. All modesty was gone. Molly and Freddie had a conversation while Molly sat stark naked on the bed. She didn't even care anymore. She just wanted the baby out. You want another bite? Brian asked gently, holding out a granola bar. Molly nodded, leaning forward to bite into the food Brian was holding out for her. I hate you, Molly said with a mouthful of granola. Brian started slightly. Why, what did I do? You and your stupid cock had to get me pregnant, you bastard, Molly said angrily. Brian sighed as he realized she was just going on a meaningless tirade. Yeah, it was all my fault. Damn right it is, Molly scoffed. You should have worn a contraction hit Molly hard, making her scream out in pain. Brian quickly held her hand, rubbing her shoulder. It's okay, just breathe, just breathe. The door opened and all the ladies came back in. We could hear you shout from all the way downstairs, Dominique said, looking scared. Molly, can you talk? Veronica asked. She went to open her mouth to speak, but was unable to form any words. Mrs. Lou nodded. All right, we're getting ready to push. Molly's lower lip trembled as she felt her body begin to prepare for pushing. Brian, Mrs. Lowe said, gushing to the door. No, Brian, stay, Molly shouted out as her contraction ended. It's not very proper, dear, Mrs. Lowe said. Fuck etiquette. My husband is going to be there when I'm pushing. Shit, another big one. Ooh, Molly cried out as her contractions now came every 2 to 3 minutes. They become strong and occur about 2 to 3. Did they literally just Google it? They like half-assed this, oh my god. Brian held Molly's hand as the girls helped her find the most comfortable position to push it. I'm right here, love. I'm not going anywhere, Brian said, kissing her on the temple. Molly nodded before beginning the daunting task of pushing. Heart, 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 heart. I can see its head, Veronica said excitedly. Molly, you're almost there. Molly was sobbing, giving every ounce of strength she had to pushing. I can't push anymore, she shouted. You have to, Mrs. May. We need a big push, Mrs. Lowe said. Molly gritted her teeth and screamed as she gave out her biggest push. One more, Brian said, alternating between looking at the baby and consoling Molly. No more, Molly shouted. Just one more and we get to meet our child, Brian said as calmly as he could, even though a hint of desperation shone in his voice. Molly took a deep breath, gripped the sheets in her hands, and pushed one final push. She grasped in relief as she felt the baby leave her. It's out, you did it, oh you did it, Brian cried out. He helped Molly lay back as Mrs. Lowe and Veronica tended to the baby. Why isn't she crying? Molly asked breathlessly. They're clearing out his airways, Brian said, his voice crackling. Wait, Molly said. His? Brian nodded. It's a boy, Molly, he whispered. We have a son. Called it. It's called father to son, for God's sake. Finally, the cries of the baby came, loud, healthy, and clear. Molly burst into tears as Mrs. Lowe held up her son. Let me hold him, Molly said. First, Brian, would you like to cut the umbilical cord? Mrs. Lowe asked. Brian wiped some tears off his face. Yes, of course. The cord was cut. The baby bathed and swaddled in the softest and warmest blankets. Molly was propped up in open arms as Victoria handed the baby to her. She was perfect, 5 pounds, 7 ounces, with a head full of dark hair. And she didn't have to deliver the placenta. Wonderful! Molly and Brian were made speechless, imitated by the small bundle that now changed their lives forever. Brian gently caressed the baby's cheek. It's our little boy, he murmured to no one in particular. Molly nodded. He's ours. We still absolutely sure about the name? Brian asked. Yes, Molly said, adjusting the baby in her arms. Michael Harold May. Brian smiled as Molly held out Michael for him to hold. Brian gently held him, staring lovingly at his newborn son. Hello, I'm your daddy, Michael. I'm your father, Brian whispered. Michael made a cooing noise. Brian swallowed a lump in his throat. I love you more than anything. I promise I will be there for you. I'll be there, my son. Nearly 8 hours of labor, but it was all worth it. To see the glow of the new parents watching their son in awe and love. Okay, I'm gonna stop it here, gang. Thank you all for joining. Thank you again, Cause, for rating. That was really nice of you. So, I'll see y'all next time.